In the quiet streets of Sherman Oaks, California, where million-dollar homes line cul-de-sacs and neighbors know each other's routines, something was off. Charles Wilding, a fixture on Kingswood Road for decades, hadn't been seen in months. The neighbors noticed. They always noticed. Wilding was a shy man, often described as a recluse. He lived in the same two-bedroom brick house since birth in 1951. As a boy, he played with neighborhood kids under the oak trees. As an adult, he kept to himself. In 2020, as the world grappled with a pandemic, Wilding's isolation took on a new dimension. He put up signs warning, urging people to stay away because he said that he had COVID. Then came the redhead. Caroline Herrling appeared out of nowhere, all smiles and energy. She breezed into Wilding's house like she owned the place. Dumpsters appeared on the street. Trucks came and went. The quiet home on Kingswood Road buzzed with activity. But now, in the fall of 2020, something changed. Wilding had vanished. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, whispers began to circulate. Where was Charles? The gossip mill on Kingswood Road went into overdrive. Who was this woman? Where was Charles? Herrling circulated a letter introducing herself as the trustee of Wilding's estate. She claimed great changes were underway to bring the property up to code. As for Charles, he was enjoying life at a beach house in Carpinteria. It sounded plausible. Almost. Neighbors didn't worry at first, but the idea of him suddenly jetting off to a beach house seemed off. On Kingswood Road, where little escapes notice, suspicions grew. Something wasn't right. The neighbors couldn't put their finger on it, but they felt it. A shadow had fallen over their street. They knew Charles. He was a homebody, a creature of habit. Every Saturday morning, like clockwork, he and his mother June would drive their Cadillac to the grocery store. After June passed in 2017, Charles became even more reclusive. Neighbors rarely saw him, save for occasional trips to Whole Foods in his puffy jacket and knit cap, worn even in the sweltering Los Angeles summer. They didn't know it yet, but they were witness to the beginning of a crime so bizarre, so twisted, it would shake their quiet community to its core. As the months rolled by, the activity at Wilding's house grew stranger. The dumpsters were being filled with Charles' belongings, kayaks, art projects, a lifetime of memories, all tossed away like yesterday's trash. She told neighbors she met the Wildings while volunteering at the Getty Museum. She spoke of Charles with familiarity, assuring everyone he was fine. But the neighbors weren't convinced. Their concern grew. Just before Christmas 2020, someone called the police. It had been 3 months since anyone had seen Charles. When the cops showed up at Wilding's door, it was Herrling who greeted them. She was cool, with confidence. She repeated her story. Charles was with friends. The house needed work. Everything was fine. They searched the house. No Charles. She gave them a phone number. The cops tried it. No answer. But Herrling had an answer for everything. She even gave them a case number for Adult Protective Services. The caseworker confirmed they were looking into Wilding's whereabouts. For the moment, it seemed there was nothing more to be done. After meeting with someone claiming to be Charles, Adult Protective Services closed their case on Wilding in January 2021. Unfortunately, Adult Protective Services never asked the man claiming to be Charles for an ID. So life on Kingswood Road continued, but an uneasy quiet settled over the street. Months passed, and still no sign of Charles Wilding. Then, in September 2021, LAPD homicide detective Mark O'Donnell received an anonymous phone call. The female caller's words sent a chill down his spine. Charles Wilding was possibly no longer alive. His identity being used for financial gain by dangerous drug users. O'Donnell, a 13-year veteran of homicide investigations, thought he'd seen it all. But this was something else entirely. He called Herrling immediately. She gave him a new bogus telephone number for Wilding. When O'Donnell pressed, she put a man on the phone claiming to be Charles, but this Charles couldn't recall his own social security or driver's license numbers. So, O'Donnell's detective instincts kicked into high gear. He visited the address Charles had given him. The man there said he barely knew Charles, hadn't seen him in years. O'Donnell then met Herrling at her posh Beverly Glen apartment. She said she was named secondary trustee by Charles' mom, June Wilding, claiming Charles couldn't handle the responsibilities, but O'Donnell wasn't buying it. As he investigated, lies unraveled like loose threads. Court filings naming Herrling as trustee were forged. The will granting Wilding $1.7 million was fake. The more O'Donnell pulled, the more the fabric of Herrling's story fell apart. He then reached out to Rodney Gould, an attorney supposedly representing Wilding. Gould had only spoken to someone claiming to be Charles by phone, with Herrling claiming he was in a nursing home. As Gould looked into Herrling's filings, he too discovered a web of forgeries and falsehoods. Meanwhile, the residents of Kingswood Road became O'Donnell's eyes and ears. They reported unusual activity at Wilding's home. Strangers coming and going at all hours. Multiple vehicles parked on the street. One neighbor even jotted down license plate numbers of suspicious visitors. The case was expanding, morphing from a simple missing persons investigation into something far more sinister. O'Donnell knew he needed help. In June 2020, he brought in Lyndon Versosa, a postal inspector expert in money laundering. His first move was to follow the money, and what they found was as significant as if they had discovered a body. In September 2021, Herrling sold a house in Encino, California. But this house belonged to a man named Robert Toscone. She used forged documents to sell it for $1.5 million. As a result of losing his home, Toscone took his own life the following year. But this was just the beginning. Herrling used money from the fraudulent sale to buy a house in West Hills, which she turned into a sober living facility. She and her boyfriend lived above the garage, later admitting they smoked meth out of sight of their recovering attic tenants. As investigators peeled back the layers of Herrling's life, they found a woman living entirely on lies. Even her bright red hair was a dye job. Caroline Herrling had reinvented herself far from her Wisconsin roots. She'd told friends she managed properties and worked for a film director. She seemed knowledgeable and grounded. Dusty Bowman, who considered Herrling a friend for nearly 20 years, described her as someone who knew a lot of things about different subjects. But Herrling's true nature eventually revealed itself. She offered to help Bowman with her divorce, then presented Bowman with a $100,000 invoice and sued her for non-payment. Their friendship devolved into a legal battle, with Bowman reporting Herrling to the state bar for unauthorized practice of law. Putting all the pieces together made it clear that Herrling was a bad person. But still, where was Wilding? In January 2023, investigators obtained a federal warrant to search Herrling's properties. They found fake IDs, stolen credit cards, forged passports, and birth certificates. They even found pieces of paper where someone had practiced June Wilding's signature. But that's not the worst part. They discovered lots of firearms, 16 in total, including unserialized ghost firearms. Many loaded, including one in Herrling's purse. They also found fake badges for the DEA, Diplomatic Security Service, and the Beverly Hills Police. Herrling claimed they were costumes. And no, we're not done. Her phone had satellite images of affluent areas, with pins marking homes that had fallen into disrepair. She had spreadsheets listing the names of heirs and current balances owed on each home. Her search history revealed queries for millionaire and obituary. This was her modus operandi, identifying and exploiting vulnerable homeowners. The same day as the search, O'Donnell and Versosa arrested Herrling for wire fraud conspiracy, aggravated identity theft, and drug possession with intent to distribute. But the case was far from over. Days later, they arrested Matthew Jason Croth, a suspected co-conspirator. Croth was very talkative. He told investigators he was an urban explorer, a fancy term for burglarizing affluent homes. He admitted to breaking into Wilding's home and finding his body decomposing. When investigators searched his vehicle, they found documents related to June and Charles Wilding. The truth, when it finally came to light, was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Charles Wilding had died in his home sometime in September 2020, but instead of reporting his death, Herrling and her co-conspirators saw an opportunity. They left his body to rot while they systematically stole his assets. Herrling forged power of attorney documents, allowing her to act on Wilding's behalf. She drained his accounts, sold his property, all while pretending the man was still alive. But as the police investigation heated up, Herrling knew she had to act. She purchased corpse smell deodorizer, a cadaver bag, gloves, and toxic chemicals in her attempt to erase all traces of Charles Wilding. She and her accomplices removed Wilding's body from his home. They took it to Herrling's apartment, where they attempted to dissolve it in a mixture of acid and lye on the rooftop balcony. For a week, they stirred the horrific concoction with a wooden baseball bat. When they failed, they resorted to even more gruesome measures. They dismembered Wilding's body, placed the pieces in vacuum-sealed bags, and transported them to the Bay Area. Herrling turned this grisly task into a macabre vacation. She rented a muscle car for the drive, posed for photos on the sailboat used to dump Wilding's remains, and returned to Los Angeles by private jet. To further cover her tracks, Herrling crushed Wilding's teeth, making identification of any remains nearly impossible. In March 2023, Herrling pleaded guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Officials from the U.S. Justice Department revealed the true scope of her crimes, a nearly $3.9 million scheme. She was sentenced to only 20 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, the residents of Kingswood Road were left to grapple with the horror that had unfolded in their quiet neighborhood. The house where Charles Wilding had lived his entire life was sold for just under $2 million. As of early 2024, no one had moved in. The same house holds the biggest mystery of the case. How did Charles Wilding die? We don't know yet, and to this day, his remains have never been found. If you found this true crime story interesting, be sure to check out more videos in our series of true crime stories. Click on the video on your screen and we'll meet you over at the next video.